You're listening to the Z-List Dead List, a podcast about obscure people from history, with me, Iszi Lawrence. Hello. As you can tell, this is an unusual episode of the Z-List Dead List podcast because we haven't got our normal Jeffrey Lewis music introducing us in, but that is because we are talking about someone from the classical music world. And so I want you to get out your powdered wigs and have a good dusting of them. I don't know why they need dusting, but apparently that's the only way to clean them. Otherwise you get poofy wigs. This is not about wigs, nor is about somebody who would wear a powdered wig, because we're talking strictly late 19th, earliest 20th century here, and we're not talking about a white man. I know. The thing is, this Z-List Dead List person is quite well known in classical music circles. She even has a festival named after her. Elizabeth de Brito, who is like the producer and host of the Daffodil Perspective, I managed to grab her and I got an interview with her over the Zoom, and I think you're going to love this. So, Elizabeth de Brito, you do a radio show called the Daffodil Project, is that right?
The Daffodil Perspective, yes.
Perspective! See, it was wrong. You just said no, Izzy. That was wrong. It's the Daffodil Perspective, which is looking at inclusivity in classical music. Is that right? Have I got this?
Yes, the tagline is creating a space for everyone to belong. What that means is it is a classical music radio show, and it is gender balanced, racially equitable and inclusive.
Because this is the thing, I'm not into classical music. I have, I think, grade 2 flute, but like 6 recorder. I'm jazzy on a recorder. Flute is harder.
Yeah, of course, recorder's awesome.
That, and despite myself, I quite like Philip Glass. Shouldn't be good, but is. But other than that, I'm completely out of the world of classical music, and when I think of images of classical music, obviously I automatically think of a lot of white European people.
Yes, white European men specifically, generally, yes.
Well, occasionally you get female opera singers, occasionally you'll get those. I'm thinking Maria Callas, there you go, there's one.
Yes, whilst singers and musicians, there are more of them. As far as composers go, it is pretty much just
white men.
That's what's sort of portrayed everywhere, that only white men write classical music.
Yeah, there is a lady, she did all the Wolf Hall music, and I like her.
Debbie Wiseman.
There you go, Debbie Wiseman. I like her, but other than that, no, I don't. Is this just classic sexism and misogyny and racism that's gone into this?
Pretty much, yeah.
Nothing special, or is there something unique to classical music that really keeps it white male?
I think classical music takes it further, because I think we all know that there is sexism and racism in every area, every field. But classical music seems to take it further, that they've been all women and all black male composers being completely obliterated from the canon, as opposed to you can hear it. Like if you were going to check out, say, pop songwriters, you could find like Diane Warren, who's completely Britain, or Fanny, or the Runaways, or the Donners. So there's bits out there, but classical music seems to have done it so well. And I don't know if it's just because they've had 400 years as opposed to pop music and jazz, which has only had like a century to get going. But
well, I think as well that jazz was black musicians really picking up on the instruments of the classical instruments and then turning it into this amazing thing. Technically, you could argue that rock music and everything else is a derivation of jazz, which is ultimately a black movement in America. You could argue.
It is.
It's specific New Orleans funeral marches, isn't it? That's basically where it all comes from. 4x4. Anyway, that's so more to the point, though. The most famous of all of the black female composers that I've never heard of is Florence Price.
Yes, I would go with that. Historical female composers, she is definitely the most famous historical black female composer.
She is famous now if you're into your classical music. But why? Where is she? Where's she from? How did she make music? When did she? All of it, please. Go.
Okay, so Florence Price was born on the 9th of April, 1887. She is from a mixed race background, like me. Yay!
I by the way, am white as a toilet, just so you know. There's nothing exciting about my ancestry.
Even your hair is white.
Even my hair.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing exciting about my ancestry. It's not exciting. It's just a fact. But anyway, yeah, Florence Price was mixed race. She was a brilliant piano player, finished high school at 14, was consistently denied study in the South where she was from. She was from Arkansas. She wasn't allowed to study music in the South. So she ended up going to the Boston Conservatory, New England Conservatory of Music in Boston, where she had double majors and completely excelled and was brilliant. But she didn't go into composition afterwards. She finished there at 19. So she came back and she really, really wanted to help the people from where she was from. She wanted to come back and be a teacher, which she did. And she wasn't allowed to teach in Arkansas in the white schools. So she founded her own school. She founded the Little Rock Club of Musicians and taught in black schools for 10 years, which was brilliant. Then because of racial tensions, and so this was the 1920s, 1930s, there was all kind of like racial tensions, Jim Crow laws, segregation, all this kind of stuff. So she ended up moving to Chicago. She was so down on her luck, she even had to move in with her friend and student Margaret Bonds, who is also a brilliant composer, BT Dubs. And then in 1933, she had a breakthrough when her symphony in E minor was premiered by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra.
Wow. Okay, so how on earth? She's been a teacher effectively all this time. So she's going through all the oppression that black people go through in America anyway, and in the 1920s, a lot worse. And also the misogyny at this time, I imagine, is pretty high. So how on earth did she get that break?
Oh, she had the good fortune to break a foot.
Okay.
That's what she said. So when she moved to Chicago, she was really down on luck. She was playing in loads of clubs. She was playing the piano, making money by teaching and playing the piano and the organ where she could. But, writing a large scale work takes a lot of time, which she didn't have. And at this point, she was raising children as well. So she didn't have any time to do it until she broke a foot and literally just had to sit all day. And then she was like, brilliant, I'll write a symphony, which is the greatest piece of classical music of all time.
She's one of these people who would have used lockdown well, I feel. She's one of these people, while we all sat down and ate crisps, she'd be just like, oh, another symphony. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, I was binge watching Bridgerton last week and, can't really see Florence Price doing that.
So she wrote this symphony, and how was it well received? What happened?
The reason why we think it's groundbreaking is because it was the first time a black female composer had been recognised as a symphonic composer. She wasn't the first black female composer. She wasn't the first black female to write large-scale orchestral or symphonic works. Nora Holt and Helen Hagen are two other composers who've done it before. But it was the first time that a black female had been played by such a major national orchestra, which the Chicago Symphony Orchestra still is. And it was incredibly well received. And she started a brilliant composition career. And this was in 1933. So she was 47 at the time. 46, 47.
Yeah, I know like Mozart was like 10 and Beethoven was deaf and dead by that time. But in my head, that's quite young for a composer of, it's like, the groundbreaking novel. You don't expect to get that until you're 50. So having a groundbreaking, am I wrong in that? Is it actually a young man's game, classical music?
Well, I think it's like everything else. Songwriters and pop stars and rock stars, they're all in their like late teens, 20s. And 30s.
I mean, no offence, but pop stars and that sort of thing, they're young and sexy. I mean, there's... can you say that classical music it's not really going for the same sort of like, leg-rubbing-y, youth is sexy and classical music's not youthful, is it? Is it? Am I wrong? Are these all stereotypes that are showing my...
Well, I think, it's definitely the stereotypes that classical music likes to portray, that it's just a bunch of old farts in wigs. I think a lot of that classical music industry doesn't help itself. I think there is a certain amount of it takes longer for people to get recognised as opposed to, say, like Ariana Grande or someone who's obviously quite famous and quite young.
Well, you see, but Ariana Grande, all she needs is a studio and a few hours and she can put out and she can mix and make a huge track. If you want to put on a performance of orchestral music, you need to get an entire orchestra on side. It's not even like, a couple of dudes playing guitar and one playing the bass and a drum set. This is a big endeavour for everybody involved.
There's not to say that there are lots of people like one of my favorite composers, Dorothy Radnor. She wrote a symphony at 20. You know, there are lots of people who do write stuff in their as students and in their 20s and 30s. I think it's just that in classical music, for some reason, people take longer to get noticed and recognized, and as you say, it is yes, the idea that it's not sexy, it's just generally more older kind of the view of it.
Is the idea that, you know, I suppose the classical words, it's a boys' club, so you have to know people in order to advance?
Yeah, well, there is definitely a lot of that, absolutely, yeah. And then, yeah, not just a boys' club as in knowing people, but the general misogyny and etc.
I seem to remember there being a news article a few years ago about they had blind auditions for an orchestra, and it turned out that orchestra admitted a lot more women than previously, because when a woman plays, if you can't see her, you think she's the best player. If you actually can see her, you say, oh, she doesn't play as well as a man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really shocking. There's also a research paper done a few years ago about telling the difference between male and female composers. And if you don't know, you can't, because there is no difference, obviously. You can't tell if it's in
the pink flowers. It's the pink flowers and the bows on the violinist's
and
heads.
the little heart every time that there's a note. Yeah.
It'll be that. So she has the success. Now, she then, I mean, how long does her career last?
Well, basically until she dies 20 years later, pretty much.
That's quite young still. She's 67, did you say?
Yeah, 66, 67. Yeah, she died in 1953. But yeah, so she wrote, so her Symphony in E minor was her first symphony. Then she's written 4 other symphonies, 3 of which have been recorded. She wrote 2 violin concertos, a ton of solo piano music, literally loads and loads of pieces, loads of art songs and various other things as well. So She wrote an awful lot.
And yet she's not a big name, or is she a big name? I mean, when did she become a big name again? Because I'm guessing this was quite a recent thing that she's been adopted again.
So there's a lot of talk now since her rediscovery. I'm using quotation marks, although you can't hear me. The white mainstream classical music completely forgot her and pretended she didn't exist and marginalized her. And now, since her rediscovery, that they're calling it this rediscovery, which is completely inaccurate. The white mainstream have started to pay attention to her, but in black musical circles, she's always been there. When she was alive, she was a huge part of the Harlem Renaissance, which is a massive black musical movement led by Langston Hughes, who's a famous poet. And she was performed by people like Marian Anderson and Leontine Price, who are both very famous singers at the time. And her music, and mostly her art songs, they've been constantly played by black musicians and in black music circles in the US, constantly since 1953. And not just that, but her piano music, there was a huge amount of work. There was a dissertation done on her in 1987 by Raylinda Brown, who was a brilliant musicologist and did tons of work on black female composers. Althea Waite, who is one of my favorite pianists ever, she did an album of her piano music, or some of her piano music, in 1993. And there was some of her violin music on another album in 1995. So, you know, black musical circles have always been playing her, always been performing her, always promoting her music. But black music circles themselves are marginalized. So, yeah, so we're sort of 50 years. Then in 2009, this couple bought this old house in Illinois and found this huge amount of music. And it all had the name Florence Price in it. So it was all like manuscripts. None of it was like published. It was all just paper copies of music. And since then, there's been this huge like interest in music that sort of gradually happened. And it's just come to a fore in the past like 2-3 years. Like I say, the white mainstream classical music have suddenly, you know, professed like huge amounts of interest in her music. Black musical circles have always been huge fans of hers.
Is this a bit problematic then? Because it just so happens that she's been ignored all of this time, and it's only now that she's just being included as a sort of novelty rather than in her true position as one of the main, composers of her era.
Well, there's certainly a lot of that. The whole thing has been very problematic, and there's been a lot of scholars who've been working on Florence Price. My personal favourite pianist, Dr. Samantha Egge, she just finished a PhD on Florence Price, and she's one of the foremost experts on her. She's been doing brilliant work. But there are lots of people that have also been sort of talking about her, and like I say, they've been mentioning words like forgotten and rediscovered, which is a very white-centric viewpoint to hold.
Well, from our perspective, she's completely like, what? Oh, look what I found. This thing which has been around for years. Yeah.
Exactly. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's new. It's like, no. So there's that. And they're also, I've actually written an article about her being exceptionalized because a lot of it has been very tokenistic. Like, she is seen so much as an exception. And to those of us who've done research, and a lot of us who've done the scholars, she wasn't. Like, she was a brilliant composer. And personally, she's my favourite composer of all time.
So we're not dissing her, but we're saying that the fact that she's been recognised, other black composers are being ignored.
Other black female composers, she is talked about as being exceptions. Like, the one black female composer, the first black female composer, is like, you know what? No, there was Nora Holt, who got a degree in music from Yale. Helen Hagen wrote Concerto in C minor. This was in 1912. So this was 20 years before Florence Price. And since then, we've got Margaret Bonds, Dorothy Rudmore, Undine Smith-Moore, Zenobia Powell Perry. I can just go on. But yeah, there are so many other ones. So this has been a kind of problematic thing, that even though Florence Price has been programmed a lot more, which is fantastic, that the white mainstream is finally programming a black female composer, it is important not to speak of her as just the only one, because there are lots of other brilliant composers that should be being played.
Do we know why she got into it? I mean, was her family into classical music? Is this something do we know anything about her background like that?
Her mother taught her to play the piano. She was involved quite heavily in church. But like, talking about that, it's like there are loads and loads of black musicians and black composers. It's not a specifically white thing that it's sort of unusual for a black person to be just doing classical music. And it's something that, again, the classical music industry sort of sells the story that only white people are interested in it, only white people do it.
But to be fair, white middle class people and upper class people, it's also seen as very exceptional if somebody from, an impoverished background picks up a trumpet and and doesn't join a brass band but actually goes for orchestra. You know what I mean?
So speaking of, as a working class person myself, yep. Can I talk about Florence Price's music itself?
Yeah, of course you can. Please do. I mean, I'm assuming it's like, plinkety plinkety plink. That's the right thing, isn't it? If you're going to stereotype classical music, that's all it sounds like. I know. I'm teasing.
Florence Price's music is just beautiful. Her Symphony in E minor was the first time I felt whole describing it. It was a lightning bolt for me. Like, I'd never heard anything like it. Like, I studied classical music growing up for 10 years, and it was just like Mozart and Beethoven and Chopin, none of whom I really like. So I was kind of completely turned off, and then I heard Florence Price, which is so good. But yeah, she combined all these African American spirituals that she heard in church and grew up with Western classical music. So it's like combining both sides of her culture. It's incredible. And it's just amazing. It's really beautiful, and gorgeous melodies, gorgeous just beautiful lyricism, easy to listen to, majorly easy to hum.
Do they get caught in your head? Are they earworms?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't stop humming her music. Yeah. I literally, when I first heard her, I was just listening to her symphony just on repeat for hours and hours and hours. That's so
And
good.
Is that where you recommend Symphony in E minor? That's
yes. So Symphony in E minor, but and I feel like I'm being a real classical music snob for this, but the new Black Music Repertory Ensemble recording is the best. There's been an Axos recording, but it's not as good. The new Black Music Repertory Ensemble recording, though, 10 years old this year, actually. So that's the best recording. It's really good.
So go snuffle that out. Have a listen, and and you can write back going, well, actually, I like Chopin. Chopin understands, speaks my soul.
Yeah, exactly.
I like a bit of Beethoven. It's simple. It comes back again and again and again. You never stray too far away from his main point, Beethoven. He's straight to the sort of like, I'm feeling sad. It's quite, I like a bit of that. And Mozart's just freaky. Mozart freaks me out a bit.
I don't know. It's just predictable. It just all sounds very the same to me. It just like all sounds.
But at the time, it would have sounded very exciting and flighty. And what's he doing?
I could do a whole nother podcast about Mariano Martinez, who influenced Mozart and was around at the same time, but she was friends with him. She was a much better composer. Yeah, she really was. It's not just me that thinks so, audiences think so too. South Florida Chamber Ensemble posted that to me on Twitter, so yeah, it's not just me. Mariano Martinez, she was a composer at the same time as Mozart and Haydn, and she was friends with both of them.
But she didn't play the thing when she was 3 and made everybody go, ooh. She wasn't 3 years old doing that, therefore Mozart wins. I'm being very sarcastic, I hope you realise.
Yeah, I got that.
I hope you can see my sarcasm. As well, this is what the thing is. I just every time I listen to classical music, I'm like, okay, I like this, and I'm chilling out, and this is good, and then you realise you don't know what you're talking about, and you have no idea what you're listening to, and it turns out to be like rubbish.
Well, if you like it, that's the main thing. You don't have to know anything about it.
Yeah, but tastes have to be cultivated, and you have to learn. You can learn to like things which are more difficult to process.
Yeah, I think that's true. Taste kind of cultivated. You kind of, if you're listening to something and you find other people who were around then, I think that's kind of the same with like most other genres as well. You kind of like, oh, I like gypsy punk, I like Bordello, so I'll go and check out Raffen and Badass Brass Band and stuff. So yeah.
Or you could just listen to the same thing again and again and again, which I think secretly you must do with Florence Price. So tell me, what is it about her which really inspires you?
She was just such a phenomenal composer. She just had such a way with her music and her voice that, what she was expressing, that makes. I just did a show because it was her birthday on the 9th of April, and my show happened to go out on the 9th of April, so I was like, yay, Florence Price party. Yep. So I was like my Florence fangirl out, and I was writing the script for the show, which I do, and I was like, Samantha Ego was talking about her music, like imagining a space for her to belong, and I was like, that's what my show does. I was just like in floods of tears. I was like, that's exactly what I do, and Florence Price did that.
So is that like your aim with the radio show?
Yeah, a lot of it is kind of creating a space where for everyone to belong, where Black people live safely. I think a lot of that kind of comes across in the way that her music's written, because it's very, very, like, the backbone of her music is African spirituals, like it's African American spirituals, and it's sort of surrounded by this Western romanticism, classical music, and all these like embellishments and all the kind of very classical kind of piano kind of stuff. And I think that was kind of a metaphor for who she was. She was a Black person. She was a mixed race person in a white dominated world, not just, in America, but in the classical music world she inhabited. She was, and I think that was a really strong metaphor for who she was and what she was kind of talking about. Is just, how the mixing of two cultures, two identities in concert, in consonance.
Literally in concert.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that really resonated for me when I listened to her music, because I felt whole, because I never felt, growing up in the UK, like I say, I'm a working class mixed race woman, I never felt like I belonged. Growing up in a white dominated world, and especially in classical music where everyone's like posh and privileged, I never felt like I belonged. And I have two sides of my identity that's like constantly in dissonance. And then when I listen to her music, I'm like, I feel whole. I don't have to choose between my identities. I don't have to be a certain way. I can just be, and that's fine. I'm mixed race, and that's who I am, and it's fine. And that's what comes across to me anyway.
It's really interesting, and the idea of also being a mixed race back in the end of the 19th century must have been a bit tricky as well.
Yeah. Oh, one that you mentioned right at the beginning, and I meant to pick up on this. So the misogyny, brilliant quote from Florence Price. I have two handicaps, that of my gender, that of my race. I have Negro blood in my veins, and I'm a woman. And she just knew like both things about her. She was like, there was racism and sexism, and she tackled both and was head on about this who she was. I'm just like, love her.
A massive thank you to Elizabeth de Brito there. You can check out her radio show, thedaffodilperspective.com. You can find her on Twitter at Daffodil Music. You can find me on Twitter at ISZI_LAWRENCE. That's Iszi Lawrence. Hey. Also, if you're going to check out Florence Price, and I know you are, remember, you got to seek out Symphony in E minor, right? And it's a new black music repertory ensemble. So, look out for that, and I know you will, because I've piqued your curiosity, and that's what this podcast is about. So go check out all of that, and until next month, I'll see you soon. You've been listening to the Z-List Deadlist podcast with me, Iszi Lawrence. Please do check out izzi.com, ISZI.com. You can buy me a coffee on Ko-Fi if you want to support the show monetarily, or if you want to, and please do, write us a review on your podcast app, share it with your friends on social media, at me, #ZListDeadlist. It's quite easy. Also, I do other podcasts. I do a podcast about dinosaurs called Terrible Lizards, which is very good, terriblelizards.co.uk. Also, I do one for the British Museum called the British Museum Membercast, and I also do one called Seti Sopo, which is with me and Simon Dunn talking about the opposite of things which do not have a natural opposite. What I need to do as well is tell you that I have a book coming out in September. It is available to pre-order. Please pre-order it. It's called Billy Swift Takes Flight, and it's all about the ATA. That's the women who flew Spitfires in the Second World War. I know, it's for kids, but adults can read it too, because, it's easy, isn't it? I mean, it's fewer words, brilliant stories, and the text is slightly bigger. Anyway, that is out in September. You can pre-order it wherever you pre-order your books normally, and it's out with Bloomsbury. So if you just Google ISZI or just go to ISZI.com, you will find it. Thank you very much.